In the grand corridors of Whitmore Palace, where centuries of tradition echo through marble halls, a single moment would test the very foundation of the monarchy. When Queen Consort Isabella's eldest son from her previous marriage walked through those sacred doors with revenge burning in his eyes, no one could have predicted that King Edmund's calm response would either save the crown or destroy it forever. What happened next would be whispered about in royal circles for decades to come, a testament to how true nobility isn't born from blood, but forged in moments when the world is watching and everything hangs in the balance. This is that story. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine gardens of Whitmore Palace as King Edmund adjusted his ceremonial uniform one final time. Today marked the 3rd anniversary of his coronation, and the nation would be watching as he addressed the Commonwealth from the palace steps. The weight of the crown felt heavier than usual, though he couldn't quite understand why. Isabella, his beloved queen consort, stood beside him in the private chambers, her emerald dress catching the light that streamed through the tall windows. She had been unusually quiet all morning, her normally bright demeanor clouded with something he couldn't identify. They had been married for 2 years now, and Edmund had grown to read her moods like weather patterns across the kingdom's skies. "You seem troubled, my dear," he said softly, reaching for her hand. The warmth of her skin did little to ease the tension he felt radiating from her. Isabella forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just nervous about today's ceremony, I suppose. You know how these public events make me feel." Edmund nodded, understanding completely. Isabella had never fully adjusted to life in the spotlight, despite her natural grace and the people's growing affection for her. She had entered his life like a gentle spring rain after a long drought, bringing laughter and genuine warmth to the cold halls of the palace. Their love story had captivated the nation. A widowed king finding happiness again with a kind-hearted woman who had lost her first husband in a tragic accident years earlier. What made their union even more special to the public was Edmund's acceptance of Isabella's son from her previous marriage. Marcus, now 26, had been 18 when his mother married the king. The young man had initially struggled with the transition, finding it difficult to navigate his new role in royal life while grieving his father's death and watching his mother find love again. "Has Marcus confirmed whether he'll attend today?" Edmund asked, straightening his medals with practiced precision. Isabella's pause lasted just a moment too long. "He said he would try to make it, but you know how busy he's been with his work at the Conservation Foundation." The Conservation Foundation had been Marcus's passion project, something Edmund had enthusiastically supported both personally and financially. The young man had thrown himself into environmental causes with admirable dedication, though Edmund sometimes wondered if it was passion or a way to avoid the palace and all its complexities. A gentle knock at the door interrupted their conversation. "Your Majesty," came the measured voice of Sir Geoffrey Hampton, the king's longest-serving advisor and closest friend. "The security briefing is ready for your review." "Come in, Geoffrey," Edmund called, watching as the distinguished man entered with his usual collection of folders and tablets. Sir Geoffrey had served the crown for over 3 decades, first under Edmund's father, and now continuing the tradition with unwavering loyalty. His silver hair and sharp blue eyes missed nothing, and his ability to anticipate problems before they arose had saved the monarchy from numerous potential scandals over the years. "The route is secure, Your Majesty. We've had additional personnel stationed along the processional path, and Captain Williams has personally overseen all arrangements." Geoffrey's voice carried its usual professional calm, but Edmund detected something else beneath the surface. "Is there something specific I should know about?" the king asked, his instincts sharpened by years of reading between the lines of official reports. Geoffrey exchanged a quick glance with Isabella, so brief that Edmund almost missed it. "Nothing concrete, Your Majesty. Just the usual precautions for a public event of this magnitude." Before Edmund could probe further, another knock echoed through the chamber. This time, it was Captain Sarah Williams, head of the Royal Guard, her crisp uniform and alert bearing commanding immediate attention. "Your Majesty, Your Highness," she said with a formal bow. "I wanted to personally confirm that all security protocols are in place for today's ceremony." Captain Williams was relatively new to her position, having been promoted just 8 months earlier, after her predecessor's retirement. She was the youngest person ever to hold the role, but her record spoke for itself. A former military officer who had served with distinction in several international peacekeeping missions, she brought fresh perspective and modern security techniques to the ancient institution. "Thank you, Captain," Edmund replied. "I have complete confidence in you and your team." The captain's expression remained professional, but something flickered in her dark eyes. "Sir, there is one matter I'd like to discuss privately when you have a moment." Edmund felt Isabella's hand tighten almost imperceptibly in his. The small gesture didn't escape his notice, adding another layer to the strange undercurrent of tension that seemed to be flowing through the morning's preparations. "Of course, Captain. Perhaps after the ceremony we can—" "Actually, Your Majesty," Captain Williams interrupted gently but firmly, "I believe it would be best if we spoke before the public appearance." The room fell silent except for the distant sounds of preparation echoing from the courtyard below. Edmund looked from Captain Williams to Geoffrey to Isabella, noting the way they all seemed to be holding their breath. "Very well," he said finally. "Geoffrey, would you give us a moment?" "Actually, sir," the advisor said carefully, "I believe Sir Geoffrey should remain for this conversation." Captain Williams interjected, "His counsel may be valuable." Isabella had grown pale, and she moved to the window overlooking the gardens where staff members were making final preparations for the day's events. Her reflection in the glass looked haunted, and Edmund felt a chill of premonition settle over him. "What exactly is this about, Captain?" he asked, his voice taking on the formal tone he used during official business. Captain Williams opened a slim folder she had been carrying and withdrew a single sheet of paper. "Your Majesty, we received some concerning intelligence late last night. There may be an attempt to disrupt today's ceremony." "What kind of disruption?" Edmund's military training kicked in automatically, his mind beginning to calculate risks and responses. "We're not entirely certain, sir. The information came through unofficial channels, and we haven't been able to verify all the details. However, it suggests that someone with palace access may be planning to make a public statement during the ceremony." Edmund frowned. "That's rather vague, Captain. Surely we deal with potential protesters and attention seekers at every public event." "Yes, sir, but this appears to be different. The intelligence suggests that the individual in question has personal motivations and intimate knowledge of palace operations." Isabella turned from the window, her face now completely drained of color. Edmund saw her reflection clearly in the glass, and the look of fear in her eyes sent alarm bells ringing in his mind. "Isabella," he said quietly, "do you know something about this?" She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, struggling with words that seemed impossible to form. Captain Williams and Geoffrey watched the exchange with professional detachment, but Edmund could feel the weight of their attention. "I think," Isabella said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "I think this might be about Marcus." The silence that followed was deafening. Edmund felt the floor shift beneath his feet, though he knew it was only his perception. Everything he thought he understood about the morning, about the strange tension, about the careful words and meaningful glances, suddenly crystallized into a sharp, painful clarity. "What about Marcus?" he asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. Isabella walked back to her husband, her steps measured and deliberate. When she reached him, she placed both hands on his chest, over his heart, as if she could somehow transfer her own strength to him through touch. "He's angry, Edmund. Angrier than I realized. Angrier than I let myself believe." Her voice grew stronger as she continued, as if speaking the truth was somehow liberating despite its painful nature. "He blames me for his father's death. He blames me for moving on, for finding happiness again. And most of all, he blames me for bringing him into this life. This fishbowl existence where every moment is scrutinized and every emotion is public property." Edmund absorbed this information with the same steady composure he had learned to apply to all royal crises, but inside, his heart was breaking. Not for himself, but for Isabella, who had clearly been carrying this burden alone. "How long have you known?" he asked gently. "I've suspected for months that his feelings were more complicated than he let on. But last night, he called me." She paused, gathering strength. "He said things, Edmund. Terrible things about our marriage, about you, about the monarchy. He said he was tired of pretending to be grateful for a life he never wanted." Captain Williams stepped forward slightly. "Your Majesty, based on our intelligence, we believe he may be planning to make some kind of public accusation or statement during today's ceremony. We don't know the exact nature of what he intends, but given his access to the palace and his knowledge of today's schedule, it could cause significant disruption," Geoffrey finished quietly. "Not just to the ceremony, but potentially to the monarchy itself, depending on what allegations he might make." Edmund felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle over his shoulders. This was what kingship truly meant. Not the ceremonies and celebrations, but moments like this when personal pain and public duty collided with devastating force. "What are our options?" he asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. "We could increase security around the ceremonial area, Limit his access if he does attempt to attend, Captain Williams suggested. We could also postpone the ceremony, cite security concerns or illness. No, Edmund said immediately. We don't run from our responsibilities, and we don't give credence to threats by changing our behavior. Edmund, Isabella said, her hands still pressed against his chest. Maybe we should consider... My dear, he interrupted gently, covering her hands with his own. I've faced hostile parliaments, international crises, and assassination attempts. I will not be deterred by family drama, however painful it might be. But even as he spoke the words, Edmund knew this was different. Political opponents and foreign threats were external challenges that came with the crown. This was personal, intimate, and infinitely more dangerous because it struck at the heart of everything he held dear. Geoffrey cleared his throat softly. Your Majesty, there is one more consideration. If Marcus does intend to make public accusations, particularly if they involve the Queen Consort, the media response could be, Why? 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 Significant. Edmund understood the implication immediately. The press had been largely supportive of his marriage to Isabella, charmed by their love story and impressed by her dedication to charitable causes. But scandal sold newspapers, and any hint of impropriety or family dysfunction would be seized upon with ruthless efficiency. What exactly did he say to you last night? Edmund asked Isabella, his voice gentle but firm. She closed her eyes, as if trying to block out the memory. He said he was going to tell the truth about our family, about what really happened before we married, about the kind of person I really am. He said the people deserved to know who they were celebrating. And what truth is that? Edmund asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer would be more about perception than reality. He believes that I never properly grieved his father, that I used his death as an opportunity to social climb, to secure our financial future by seducing a king. The words came out in a rush, as if she had been holding them back for too long. He thinks I manipulated you, that our entire relationship is built on lies and opportunism. Edmund felt a flash of anger, not at Isabella, but at the young man who would cause his mother such pain based on his own unprocessed grief and resentment. But anger was a luxury kings could rarely afford, especially in moments of crisis. Captain Williams, he said, turning to face her directly, I want you to double the security presence, but quietly. No obvious changes that might attract attention or suggest we're responding to a specific threat. And I want Marcus located and monitored, but not approached unless he actually attempts something disruptive. Yes, Your Majesty. Geoffrey, I want you to prepare 3 statements, one for if nothing happens and the ceremony proceeds normally, one for if Marcus makes minor disruptions that we can address diplomatically, and one for if he makes serious public accusations that require immediate response. Of course, Your Majesty. Edmund turned to Isabella, seeing his own reflection in her worried eyes. And you, my dear Queen, are going to hold your head high and smile at our people as if nothing in the world could shake your faith in our love and our purpose. Edmund, what if he's right? She whispered, voicing the fear that had clearly been eating at her for months. What if I did use you? What if my feelings weren't pure from the beginning? What if... Stop, he said firmly, but with infinite gentleness. He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. I fell in love with you, Isabella. Not your title, not your status, not what you could give me. You. Your kindness, your laughter, your strength, your vulnerability. Nothing Marcus says or believes can change that truth. The conviction in his voice seemed to steady her, and some of the color returned to her cheeks. But if he does this publicly, if he tries to destroy us, then we will face it together with dignity and grace, exactly as we've faced everything else. Edmund straightened to his full height, every inch the monarch his people needed him to be. Now, shall we go show our subjects what a royal couple looks like? As they prepared to leave the private chambers and step into the public eye, none of them could have anticipated just how severely their resolve would be tested in the hours to come. The ceremony that was meant to celebrate 3 years of Edmund's reign would instead become a defining moment that would either strengthen the monarchy's foundation or shake it to its very core. Outside, the crowds were gathering, unaware that they were about to witness not just a celebration, but a royal family's most private pain played out on the most public stage imaginable. The grand ballroom of Whitmore Palace buzzed with anticipation. As distinguished guests from across the Commonwealth took their seats, Ambassadors, ministers, and nobility filled the ornate space, their formal attire creating a sea of elegant colors against the backdrop of centuries-old tapestries and crystal chandeliers. The ceremony was set to begin in less than an hour, and every detail had been orchestrated with military precision. Captain Sarah Williams moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her trained eye constantly scanning for anything out of place. Her earpiece crackled occasionally with updates from her team stationed throughout the palace and grounds. So far, everything appeared normal, but the intelligence from the previous night continued to weigh heavily on her mind. She had been in her position for 8 months now, long enough to understand the unique challenges of protecting a monarch who insisted on maintaining personal connections with his people. King Edmund refused to live behind bulletproof glass, preferring walkabouts and impromptu conversations that made her security team's job infinitely more complex. Today's ceremony would be no different, with planned interaction periods where the king and queen consort would mingle with selected guests. Captain Williams' status report came the voice of her lieutenant through the earpiece. All clear in the main ballroom. Have you located our person of interest? She replied quietly, using the code they had established for Marcus. Negative. He hasn't been spotted entering through any of the main entrances. Vehicle surveillance shows no sign of his car in the surrounding area. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and continued concern. Marcus's absence might mean the intelligence had been wrong, or it might mean he was planning something more elaborate than a simple disruption during the ceremony. She had learned never to underestimate the determination of someone with personal grievances against the royal family. Meanwhile, in the palace's private wing, Isabella made her final preparations with the help of her lady-in-waiting, Charlotte Morrison. Charlotte had become more than just an assistant over the past 2 years. She had become a trusted friend and confidant, one of the few people who truly understood the pressures of Isabella's position. "You look absolutely radiant, Your Highness," Charlotte said as she adjusted the diamond necklace that had belonged to Edmund's grandmother. The emerald dress was the perfect choice. Isabella studied her reflection in the antique mirror, seeing not just her external appearance but the weight of responsibility that seemed to grow heavier each day. "Charlotte, do you ever wonder if I'm truly suited for this life?"
Charlotte paused in her ministrations, meeting Isabella's eyes in the mirror.
"Your Highness, I've served this family for 15 years. I've seen queens who are born to this role struggle with its demands. You have brought something special to this palace, something that was missing for a very long time." "And what's that?" "Humanity," Charlotte replied simply. "King Edmund was a good king before he met you, but he was becoming distant, formal, isolated. You reminded him how to connect with people, how to show emotion without weakness. The people see that, and they love you for it." Isabella felt tears threatening to form and quickly blinked them away. Today was not a day for crying, no matter what personal storms might be brewing. "Thank you, Charlotte. Your loyalty means more than you know." As Isabella finished her preparations, King Edmund was meeting with Sir Geoffrey in his study, reviewing the final security briefings and ceremonial protocol. The study was Edmund's favorite room in the palace, lined with books collected by generations of monarchs, and featuring a massive oak desk that had witnessed countless historic decisions. "The guest list has been triple-checked," Geoffrey reported, his usual efficiency in full display. "Everyone present has been properly vetted, and we've confirmed that all attendees are accounted for except Marcus," Edmund finished. "Yes, Your Majesty. His absence is noted, but given the circumstances, perhaps it's for the best." Edmund stood and walked to the window that overlooked the palace gardens, where he could see the final preparations being made for the outdoor portion of the ceremony. "Geoffrey, you've known me for a very long time. Do you believe I made the right decision in marrying Isabella?" The question surprised the older man, who was accustomed to discussing policy and protocol rather than personal matters. "Your Majesty, that's not really my place to—" "I'm not asking as your king, Geoffrey. I'm asking as your friend." Sir Geoffrey considered his words carefully. "I believe you found something rare and precious in Queen Isabella. I've watched you both over these past 2 years, and I've never seen you happier or more grounded. Whatever challenges her son may present, they don't change the fundamental truth of what you've built together." Edmund nodded, finding comfort in his old friend's assessment. "And if Marcus does attempt to publicly challenge that truth today, then we handle it the way we handle all threats to the crown, with dignity, facts, and unwavering commitment to our duties."
Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door.
Captain Williams entered, her expression carefully neutral but alert. Your Majesty, we've received an update. Marcus Harrison has been spotted approaching the palace grounds, but not through any of the main entrances. He appears to be using service roads that he would be familiar with from his previous time living here. Edmund felt his pulse quicken slightly, but his exterior remained calm. What are his apparent intentions? Unknown at this time, sir. He's alone, and our surveillance shows no signs of weapons or obvious threats. However, he does appear to be carrying a briefcase and what looks like documentation of some kind. Documentation? Edmund exchanged a glance with Geoffrey, both men understanding the potential implications. It could be personal papers, photographs, correspondence, anything that he believes supports whatever case he intends to make. Geoffrey said quietly. Edmund made a decision that would define not just the day, but potentially his entire reign. Captain Williams, I want Marcus allowed to enter the palace. Both Geoffrey and the captain looked surprised. Your Majesty, Captain Williams said carefully, given the potential security risk, is not as great as the risk of appearing afraid of our own family members.
Edmund interrupted firmly.
If Marcus wants to confront me, then let him do it properly, face to face, rather than creating a public spectacle. Have him escorted to the blue drawing room. I'll speak with him before the ceremony begins. Sir, the timing... Geoffrey began. Will be managed. We have 30 minutes before I need to appear publicly. That should be sufficient to understand what we're dealing with and hopefully resolve it privately. Captain Williams looked uncertain, but nodded. I'll have him escorted immediately with full security presence, but at a respectful distance. And, Captain, Edmund added, please ask Queen Isabella to join us in the blue drawing room. Whatever Marcus intends to say, she has a right to hear it directly. As Captain Williams left to carry out his instructions, Geoffrey approached the king with visible concern. Your Majesty, are you certain this is wise? If Marcus is truly intent on causing damage, giving him a private audience might provide him with information or ammunition he could later use publicly. Edmund considered this, then shook his head. Geoffrey, we've built our entire constitutional monarchy on the principle that sunlight is the best disinfectant. If there are problems in our family, hiding from them or trying to suppress them will only make them worse. Better to confront them directly and with dignity.
And if his accusations are particularly damaging?
If he has evidence of something we don't know about, then we deal with the truth, whatever it may be. The Crown has survived scandals before, and it will survive them again, but only if we maintain our integrity and commitment to transparency. 10 minutes later, Edmund and Isabella stood together in the blue drawing room, an intimate space typically used for small family gatherings or private meetings with trusted friends. The room's soft furnishings and warm color scheme created an atmosphere of comfort and safety, though today it felt more like a courtroom waiting for trial to begin. Isabella had been remarkably composed since learning of Marcus's arrival at the palace. The initial shock and fear had been replaced by a kind of resigned determination, as if she had finally decided to stop running from a confrontation that had been building for months. Are you prepared for this? Edmund asked, taking her hand in his. I don't think anyone can be prepared for their child to publicly denounce them, she replied, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. But yes, I'm ready to face whatever he has to say. The door opened, and Captain Williams entered, followed by Marcus Harrison. Isabella's son had grown into a handsome young man, tall and lean with dark hair and intense green eyes that reminded everyone who met him of his mother. Today, however, his usual charm was nowhere to be seen, replaced by a hard expression of determination and barely controlled anger. Marcus carried a leather briefcase in one hand and what appeared to be a manila envelope in the other. He was dressed formally, as if he had been planning to attend the ceremony, but his disheveled appearance suggested he had spent a sleepless night preparing for this confrontation. Your Majesty, he said, offering a perfunctory bow that managed to be technically correct while somehow feeling like an insult. Marcus, Edmund replied evenly, gesturing to one of the comfortable chairs arranged near the fireplace. Please, sit down. I prefer to stand, Marcus replied, his voice tight with controlled emotion. This won't take long. Isabella stepped forward, her maternal instincts overriding royal protocol. Marcus, whatever you think you need to say, we can discuss this as a family. There's no need for... Family? Marcus interrupted, his composure finally cracking. You want to talk about family now, Mother? After 2 years of pretending we're some kind of happy royal fairy tale? Edmund remained silent, recognizing that this moment belonged to mother and son, despite his central role in their conflict. I have never pretended anything, Isabella replied firmly. I have been honest about my feelings, about my hopes for our future, about my love for both you and Edmund." Marcus laughed bitterly, opening his briefcase and withdrawing a stack of papers. "Honest? Really? Should we discuss honesty, Mother? Should we talk about the truth you've been so careful to hide?" "What truth?" Edmund asked, speaking for the first time since the initial greeting. Marcus turned his attention to the king, and the anger in his eyes was unmistakable. "The truth about why my father really died, Your Majesty. The truth about what my mother was doing in the months before she met you. The truth about the debts, the lies, the careful manipulation that brought her into your life." The room fell completely silent. Isabella had gone pale again, but she didn't deny the accusations or try to interrupt her son. Edmund watched both of them, his analytical mind trying to process what he was hearing while his heart struggled with the implications. "Go on," Edmund said quietly. Marcus pulled a document from his envelope, holding it out toward the king. "My father didn't die in a simple car accident, as everyone believes. He died driving to meet someone about the massive gambling debts he had accumulated. Debts that my mother knew about for months before his death." "Marcus, that's not," Isabella began. "It's not what, Mother?" "Not true. These are bank statements, loan documents, correspondence between you and father's creditors." He turned back to Edmund, his voice rising with emotion. "She knew he was in financial trouble. She knew he was desperate. She knew he was meeting with dangerous people, and she let him go alone because she was afraid of the scandal." Edmund accepted the documents, scanning them quickly while maintaining his outward composure. The papers appeared genuine, showing significant financial irregularities and debt accumulation in the months before Isabella's first husband's death. "Even if this is true," Edmund said carefully, "I fail to see how it reflects on your mother's character or our marriage." Marcus pulled out another set of papers, his hands shaking slightly with barely contained rage. "Because she started researching you before father's body was even cold, Your Majesty. She identified you as a target for her attentions while she was still wearing black to his funeral." This accusation hit differently, and Edmund felt something cold settle in his stomach. He looked at Isabella, searching her face for denial, explanation, anything that would contradict what her son was claiming. "Is this true?" he asked simply. Isabella closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were filled with tears she could no longer hold back. "It's true and it's not true," she said quietly. "That's not an answer I can accept," Edmund replied, his voice still gentle but carrying the weight of absolute authority.
"Yes," Isabella said, straightening her shoulders and meeting his gaze directly. "I did research you after Robert died."
"I did identify you as someone who might be sympathetic to a widow in difficult circumstances. I did engineer our first meeting, knowing you would be at that charity gala." The admission hung in the air like a physical weight. Marcus looked vindicated. Edmund looked stunned, and Isabella looked as if she had just sealed her own fate. "But," she continued, her voice growing stronger, "everything that happened after that first meeting was real. My feelings, my love, my commitment to you and to the crown. Yes, I approached you initially out of desperation and calculation, but I fell in love with you completely and genuinely." Edmund absorbed this revelation, his mind racing through memories of their courtship, trying to separate what had been real from what had been performance. The woman he had fallen in love with, the woman he had married, the woman he had trusted with his heart and his crown, had begun their relationship with deception. "And you never thought to tell me this?" he asked. "How could I?" Isabella replied, tears now flowing freely. "How could I tell the man I loved that our entire relationship began with lies? How could I risk losing you when I had finally found real happiness?" Marcus stepped forward, his triumph at having his accusations confirmed now mixed with genuine pain at seeing his mother's anguish. "This is why I had to speak up, Your Majesty. The people deserve to know what kind of woman they're celebrating. The crown deserves better than to be built on manipulation and lies." Edmund looked at the young man, seeing not just anger and righteousness, but deep, unprocessed grief for his father and confusion about his place in the world. "And what would you have me do with this information, Marcus?" "I want you to tell the truth publicly. I want the people to know that this marriage began with deception. I want justice for my father's memory." "Your father's memory," Edmund repeated thoughtfully. "Tell me, Marcus, what do you think your father would want? Would he want his son to destroy his mother's happiness out of a desire for revenge? Would he want his family torn apart by pain and recrimination?" Marcus faltered slightly, clearly not having considered this perspective. He would want the truth to be known. Perhaps, Edmund acknowledged, but he would also want his son to find peace and his wife to find love again, don't you think? The question hung in the air as all three of them grappled with the complex emotions and competing loyalties that had brought them to this moment. Outside, the ceremony guests were taking their final seats, unaware that the future of the monarchy was being decided in a quiet drawing room where a family was finally confronting its deepest wounds. The silence in the blue drawing room stretched on, punctuated only by the distant sounds of the ceremony preparations continuing outside. Edmund stood with the documents in his hands, reading through them more carefully, while Isabella and Marcus watched his face for any sign of his reaction. Captain Williams remained positioned near the door, professionally invisible, but ready to act if needed. Edmund finally set the papers down on a nearby table and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back in the stance that had become familiar to anyone who had observed him during moments of deep consideration. When he turned back to face them, his expression was unreadable. "Marcus," he said quietly, "I understand your anger, and I understand your pain. Losing a father is devastating, especially under circumstances that feel senseless and preventable. But I need you to understand something about the choice you're facing right now." The young man shifted uncomfortably, but maintained his defiant posture. "What choice? You can destroy your mother publicly, expose what you see as her deception, and feel justified in your revenge. You'll damage the monarchy, create a scandal that will follow your family for generations, and ensure that your father's death becomes tabloid fodder rather than a private tragedy. Or," Edmund paused, letting the weight of the alternative settle over them, "you can choose to understand that grief and desperation can lead good people to make complicated choices, and that sometimes love grows from unexpected beginnings." Isabella wiped her tears, watching her son's face as he processed the king's words. She could see the war being fought behind his eyes, between his desire for justice and his underlying love for her, between his anger at the circumstances of his father's death and his recognition that destroying her wouldn't bring his father back. "She lied to you," Marcus said, but his voice had lost some of its earlier conviction. "Yes, she did," Edmund agreed. "She omitted important information about how our relationship began. But Marcus, every relationship involves some measure of performance initially. People present their best selves, hide their flaws, try to become the person they think the other wants. What matters is what happens after the initial attraction, what grows from those first encounters." Edmund walked closer to Isabella, taking her hand despite the revelations that had just shaken the foundation of their marriage. "Your mother may have approached me with calculated intentions, but the woman I fell in love with, the woman I married, the woman who has stood beside me through every challenge of the past 2 years, that woman is real. Her devotion to charitable causes, her genuine care for the people of this kingdom, her love for both you and me, none of that was performance." Marcus looked at their joined hands, his own clenched into fists at his sides. "But it started with lies."
Everything was built on lies.
No.
Isabella spoke for the first time since her confession, her voice hoarse but determined. "It started with desperation and fear, Marcus."
"I was terrified after your father died. We had no money, massive debts, and I didn't know how to protect you or give you the future you deserved. Yes, I approached Edmund with calculated intentions, but from the moment I actually spoke with him, from the moment I saw his kindness and integrity, everything changed." She turned to face Edmund fully, still holding his hand but needing him to see the truth in her eyes. "I fell in love with you on our second date, when you spent an entire evening talking about your plans to modernize the monarchy's approach to mental health issues. You weren't trying to impress me, you weren't performing royal duty, you were just passionate about helping people. That's when I realized that what I had planned as manipulation had become something completely different. But you never told me about the debts, about your real circumstances," Edmund said, his voice gentle but probing. "I was ashamed," Isabella admitted, "and I was terrified that if you knew how desperate I had been, you would question whether my feelings were ever genuine. By the time I realized how deeply I loved you, the lie had grown too big to confess without risking everything." Marcus watched this exchange with growing confusion, his black and white narrative of deception and betrayal becoming complicated by the obvious genuine emotion between his mother and stepfather.
"But father," he began.
"Your father was a good man who made some very bad choices," Isabella interrupted, turning to face her son directly. "He was gambling because he was trying to find a way to solve our financial problems quickly. He was meeting with those people because he thought he could negotiate a payment plan that wouldn't destroy our family. He didn't tell me the full extent of what was happening, because he was trying to protect us from his mistakes. You could have gone with him that night, Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly.
You could have been there to help him. Yes, I could have. And maybe if I had been there, the accident wouldn't have happened. Or maybe we both would have died, and you would have been left completely alone. Isabella's own voice was breaking now, with years of suppressed guilt and regret. I live with that guilt every day, Marcus. I live with the knowledge that my last words to your father were angry ones, that I was frustrated with him for keeping secrets about our finances. She walked closer to her son, desperate to bridge the gap that had been widening between them for years. But I cannot live with the guilt of not taking the chance at happiness that presented itself when I met Edmund. Your father would not have wanted me to spend the rest of my life punishing myself for surviving when he didn't. Edmund watched the interplay between mother and son, recognizing the deep family dynamics that had brought them to this crisis. He made a decision that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. Marcus, he said, I have a proposition for you. The young man looked wary. What kind of proposition? Join us for the ceremony today. Not as someone plotting to expose secrets, but as my stepson, as part of this family. After the ceremony, after we've fulfilled our public duties, the three of us will sit down together and have the conversation we should have had 2 years ago. We'll talk about your father, about grief, about the complexities of love and family and duty. We'll be honest about all of it. And in return? Marcus asked suspiciously. In return, you give us the chance to be a real family, not just people who happen to share legal connections. You give your mother the chance to show you that her love for me doesn't diminish her love for your father's memory. And you give me the chance to prove that I care about you not just as Isabella's son, but as someone I genuinely want in my life. The offer hung in the air between them, a bridge across years of misunderstanding and pain. Marcus looked at the documents he had brought as weapons, then at his mother's tear-stained face, then at Edmund's steady, compassionate gaze. What about the truth? He asked quietly. What about justice for father? The truth is complex, Marcus. Justice isn't always about punishment or public exposure. Sometimes justice is about healing, about finding ways to honor the memory of those we've lost while still allowing ourselves to live and love again. Captain Williams, who had been silent throughout the entire confrontation, suddenly spoke up. Your Majesty, we need to begin the processional in 10 minutes. The reminder brought them all back to the immediate reality of their public responsibilities. Edmund looked at Marcus expectantly, waiting for his decision. I need a moment, Marcus said, walking to the window and staring out at the crowds gathering for the ceremony. Isabella and Edmund exchanged glances, both recognizing that this moment would define not just their relationship with Marcus, but the future of their marriage and their family. The revelations of the past hour had shaken Edmund's understanding of how their relationship began, but they had also revealed the depth of Isabella's commitment to making their marriage genuine and meaningful. Whatever he decides, Edmund said quietly to Isabella, we face it together. She squeezed his hand gratefully, drawing strength from his steady presence. I'm sorry I never told you about how we met. I'm sorry I let you believe it was all coincidence and fate.
Was any of it real?
Edmund asked, voicing the question that had been haunting him since her confession. Every moment after our first conversation was real, Isabella replied without hesitation. The feelings, the connection, the love, all of it. The only lie was in how it began. Edmund nodded slowly, processing this distinction. Then we build from what's real, and we learn from what was not. Marcus turned back from the window, his face showing the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for too long. I want to believe you, he said to both of them. I want to believe that something good can come from something that started with deception. But I don't know how to let go of the anger. You don't have to let go of it all at once. Edmund replied gently. Anger is part of grief, and grief is the price we pay for love. Your anger shows how much you loved your father, how much you miss him, how much you want justice for his memory. Those are not bad things, Marcus. Then what am I supposed to do with it? Use it to honor his memory in positive ways. Channel it into your conservation work, into making the world better, into protecting other families from the kind of financial desperation that contributed to his death. Edmund paused, considering his next words carefully. And maybe eventually use it to help other young people who are struggling with grief and family changes. Isabella watched her son's face, seeing something shift in his expression. Marcus, your father was so proud of your environmental work. He used to tell everyone about your passion for protecting natural habitats, about the future you were building. Don't let anger destroy the legacy he was most proud of. The young man's shoulders sagged slightly, as if some of the tension was finally leaving his body. I miss him so much, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I know you do, Isabella replied, her own tears starting again. I miss him too. He was my first love, the father of my child, my partner through some of the most difficult years of my life. Loving Edmund doesn't erase that, Marcus. It doesn't diminish what your father meant to me. But you moved on so quickly, Marcus protested, though his voice lacked its earlier vehemence. I moved on because I had to survive, and because I had to think about your future, Isabella explained. But Marcus, every happy moment I've had with Edmund has been touched with sadness that your father couldn't be here to see it. Every milestone, every celebration, every quiet evening, part of me wishes Robert could have lived to see you become the amazing young man you are. Edmund felt the emotional weight of the conversation, understanding that he was witnessing a family finally confronting years of unspoken grief and resentment. Marcus, he said gently, your place in this family isn't dependent on your approval of how it began. You are Isabella's son, which makes you important to me regardless of our personal relationship. But I would like the chance to earn your respect and affection based on who I am now, not on the circumstances of how your mother and I met. Captain Williams stepped forward slightly. Your Majesty, 5 minutes. The pressure of time forced a decision. Marcus looked at his mother, then at Edmund, then at the documents that had seemed so important when he first arrived. I'll attend the ceremony, he said finally, but I want that conversation afterward. I want honesty about everything, not just the convenient parts. You'll have it, Edmund promised, and I want to be involved in decisions about Father's legacy, about how our family story is told, about how we honor his memory while building our future. Of course, Isabella agreed immediately. Marcus walked to the table where he had placed his documents and carefully returned them to his briefcase. These stay private for now, but if I ever feel like you're not being honest with me, if I ever think you're going back to the lies and manipulation, you won't, Edmund said with quiet confidence, because we're not the same people we were when this all began. We've all grown, we've all learned, and we've all recognized that family is too important to sacrifice to pride or fear. As they prepared to leave the drawing room and join the ceremony, none of them could have predicted how the events of the next few hours would test their newly forged understanding. The public appearance would bring its own challenges, and the conversations that followed would reshape their family in ways they were only beginning to imagine. The processional music began as King Edmund, Queen Isabella, and Marcus took their positions for the ceremony. The transformation in all three of them was remarkable. Edmund carried himself with renewed purpose, his earlier uncertainty replaced by the quiet confidence of a man who had faced difficult truths and emerged stronger. Isabella radiated a different kind of dignity now. The weight of hidden secrets lifted from her shoulders, replaced by the courage that comes from choosing honesty despite its risks. Marcus walked slightly behind them, his formal attire properly adjusted and his expression carefully composed. To outside observers, he looked like the devoted stepson, joining his family for an important state occasion. Only those who knew the morning's events could detect the subtle tension in his posture, the way his eyes constantly moved between his mother and stepfather, as if he were still processing the revelations and decisions of the past hour. Captain Williams and her security team had seamlessly adapted to Marcus's presence, their earlier concerns about potential disruption replaced by professional vigilance for any other threats. The intelligence about possible problems during the ceremony had proven accurate in its source but dramatically different in its resolution than anyone had anticipated. The grand ballroom erupted in polite applause as the royal family entered, hundreds of distinguished guests rising to their feet in respect. The scene was magnificent, with morning sunlight streaming through tall windows to illuminate the crystal chandeliers and gold leaf that adorned the walls. Photographers captured every moment, their cameras clicking in careful orchestration to document this celebration of Edmund's third year as monarch. Edmund approached the podium with measured steps, his speech carefully balanced to acknowledge the crown's traditions, while emphasizing his vision for a modern, accessible monarchy. He spoke of service, dedication, and the importance of genuine connection between the royal family and the people they served. His words carried special weight given the morning's events, though none of the guests could have understood the deeper meaning behind his emphasis on authenticity and truth. The crown endures not because it is perfect, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom, but because it is willing to grow, to learn, and to face difficult truths with courage and dignity. A monarchy that hides behind tradition without embracing change is a monarchy that fails its people. Isabella watched from her place of honor, seeing new layers of meaning in words that had been written days earlier but now seemed prophetic. She caught Edmund's eye during a pause in his speech, and the look that passed between them was one of understanding, forgiveness, and renewed commitment. Marcus stood with other family members, his attention split between his stepfather's words and his own internal processing of the morning's revelations. He found himself studying Edmund with new eyes, seeing not just the king who had married his mother, but the man who had chosen compassion over condemnation, understanding over judgment, when faced with painful truths about how their relationship had begun. The ceremony proceeded flawlessly through its various segments: musical performances by renowned artists, presentations by Commonwealth representatives, and the formal renewal of oaths that bound the monarch to his people and his people to the crown. Each element had been carefully planned to reinforce the themes of continuity, service, and the enduring relationship between the royal family and the nation. During the final segment, when Edmund and Isabella were scheduled to greet selected guests individually, something unexpected happened. A young journalist in the crowd, someone who had not been part of the official media pool, managed to position herself near the receiving line and called out a question that made everyone freeze. "Your Majesty, there are rumors about family tensions and potential scandals involving Queen Isabella's past. Can you comment on reports that there may be revelations that could affect the monarchy's reputation?" The ballroom fell completely silent. Every eye turned to the king, waiting to see how he would handle this ambush. Captain Williams immediately began moving toward the journalist, but Edmund held up a subtle hand to stop her. Marcus felt his heart racing, wondering if this was somehow connected to his planned revelations, if word of his intentions had somehow leaked despite the morning's private resolution. He looked at his mother, seeing her face pale slightly, but her posture remained dignified and strong. Edmund stepped slightly forward, his expression calm and thoughtful. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of his office, but also a warmth that reminded everyone why the people had embraced him as their monarch. "I appreciate your question," he said directly to the journalist, "because it gives me an opportunity to address something important about the nature of truth and family and the responsibilities that come with public service." He paused, gathering his thoughts, aware that his next words would be dissected and analyzed by media outlets around the world. Every family, including royal families, faces challenges, disagreements, and moments when difficult conversations must be had. The question is not whether these moments occur, but how we handle them when they do. Do we allow them to divide us, or do we use them as opportunities to grow stronger and more honest with ourselves and each other? The journalist pressed forward. "But specifically, Your Majesty, are there issues regarding how your relationship with Queen Isabella began that the public should know about?" Edmund felt Isabella's slight intake of breath beside him, and he sensed Marcus's tension from across the room. This was the moment he had not anticipated, when their private family resolution would be tested in the most public possible forum. "My relationship with Queen Isabella," he said clearly and deliberately, "began like many relationships do, with two people meeting at a difficult time in their lives and finding comfort, understanding, and eventually love in each other's company. The specifics of how we met, what circumstances brought us together, and what challenges we faced together are part of our personal story, just as they would be for any couple." He looked directly at the journalist, his gaze steady and uncompromising. "What matters to the people of this kingdom is not the private details of how love develops, but the public commitment that two people make to serve something larger than themselves. Queen Isabella and I have made that commitment. We renew it every day through our work and service, and we will continue to honor it regardless of whatever rumors or speculation may circulate." The journalist seemed prepared to ask a follow-up question, but Edmund continued speaking, effectively closing off further inquiry. "I would also like to say that the strongest families, including royal families, are those that can have honest conversations about difficult subjects, that can forgive past mistakes, and that can choose love and understanding over judgment and condemnation. These are the values we try to embody in our public service, and they are the values that guide our personal relationships as well." He turned slightly to include Isabella and Marcus in his gaze. "Family is not perfect, people living perfect lives. Family is imperfect, people choosing to love and support each other through imperfect circumstances. That is what we have, that is what we celebrate, and that is what we offer as an example to the families throughout our kingdom." The applause that followed was spontaneous and sustained, clearly indicating that the guests approved of Edmund's handling of the unexpected challenge.
The journalist seemed to recognize that she would not be getting the scandalous revelation she had hoped for, and she stepped back into the crowd. Isabella felt tears of gratitude and relief threatening to form, amazed by Edmund's ability to acknowledge the complexity of their situation without betraying any confidences or creating ammunition for those who might wish to damage them. He had found a way to be honest about the fact that families face challenges while maintaining the dignity and privacy that their positions required. Marcus watched this exchange with growing admiration for his stepfather's handling of what could have been a devastating moment. Edmund had not denied that there were complicated family dynamics, but he had reframed them in terms of growth, forgiveness, and the strength that comes from facing difficulties together rather than allowing them to create division. As the ceremony concluded and guests began to filter out of the ballroom, the royal family maintained their composed public personas while privately processing what had just occurred. The unexpected challenge had actually served to reinforce their morning's private resolution, demonstrating that their choice to confront difficult truths together had prepared them to face public scrutiny with greater strength and unity. Captain Williams approached them as the crowd thinned. "Your Majesty, we've identified the journalist. She's not part of any established media organization. Appears to be freelancing, possibly looking for a story to sell. We're investigating how she gained access to the ceremony." "Thank you, Captain, but I don't think that will be necessary," Edmund replied. "She asked a fair question, and I believe we answered it appropriately. Sometimes these challenges serve a purpose, even when they're not welcome." As they prepared to move to the private reception that would conclude the day's official events, Marcus approached his mother and stepfather with visible emotion. "I want to apologize," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the continuing conversations around them. "Not just for this morning, but for the past 2 years. I've been so focused on what I thought was wrong with our family that I never stopped to appreciate what was right with it." Isabella reached for her son's hand, squeezing it gently. "There's nothing to apologize for, Marcus. Grief and confusion and anger are all natural responses to the changes we've all been through. But watching how Edmund handled that journalist, seeing how he protected our family, while still being honest about the fact that we're not perfect," Marcus shook his head.
"I realized that what I was planning to do this morning would have destroyed something precious, not just for you two, but for everyone who looks to the royal family as an example of how to handle life's difficulties."
Edmund placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, a gesture that felt natural and genuine, for the first time since they had known each other.
"The fact that you can recognize that shows tremendous character and maturity. Your father would be proud of the man you're becoming." The three of them stood together for a moment, surrounded by the lingering grandeur of the ceremony, but focused entirely on the quiet miracle of family healing that was taking place between them. They had faced their deepest fears and most painful truths, and they had chosen love and understanding over judgment and retribution. "Now," Edmund said with a slight smile, "I believe we promised you a completely honest conversation after the ceremony. Are you prepared for that?" Marcus nodded, feeling lighter than he had in months. "I think I finally am." As they moved toward the private wing of the palace where they could continue their family discussion away from public eyes, none of them realized that their morning's crisis and its resolution would become a defining moment not just for their personal relationships, but for the monarchy itself. The way they had chosen to handle family conflict, public scrutiny, and the complex realities of love and loss would set a new standard for royal transparency and authenticity that would influence the crown for generations to come. 3 hours later, the formal ceremonies were complete, the last of the guests had departed, and the palace had returned to its usual rhythm of quiet efficiency. King Edmund, Queen Isabella, and Marcus sat in the private family dining room, a comfortable space that bore no resemblance to the grand public rooms where affairs of state were conducted. Here, surrounded by family photographs and personal mementos, they could finally have the conversation that had been building for years. The contrast between the morning's tension and the evening's atmosphere was remarkable. Where there had been anger and accusation, there was now careful attention and genuine curiosity. Where there had been fear and defensiveness, there was now courage and openness. The crisis had burned away the pretense and politeness that had characterized their family relationships, leaving space for something more authentic to grow. Edmund had changed out of his ceremonial uniform into casual clothes, a symbolic gesture that emphasized his role as stepfather rather than monarch. Isabella had similarly abandoned the formal attire of her public role, choosing instead a simple dress that reminded Marcus of how she had looked during his childhood before titles and duties had complicated their lives. "I want to start," Edmund said, "by acknowledging that we've all made mistakes in how we've handled our family relationships. I think I've been too focused on trying to make everything appear perfect
too concerned with public perception and not attentive enough to the private emotional work that families require. Marcus appreciated this admission, recognizing the courage it took for a king to acknowledge personal failures. "I've been angry for a long time," he replied. "Angry at father for dying, angry at mother for moving on, angry at you for existing, angry at myself for not being able to protect either of them from pain." Isabella listened to her son's honesty with a mixture of heartbreak and pride. "I've been afraid," she added. "Afraid of being alone, afraid of being poor, afraid of not being able to give you the future you deserved, afraid of losing Edmund's love if he knew the truth about how I approached him, afraid of losing your love if you thought I had betrayed your father's memory." They sat with these admissions for a moment, letting the weight of finally spoken truths settle between them. "Tell me about father," Marcus said quietly. "Tell me what he was really like, not just the sanitized version you've both given me since he died." Isabella smiled sadly, remembering the man she had first loved. "Your father was charming and optimistic and absolutely convinced that everything would work out in the end, even when all evidence suggested otherwise. He was the kind of person who would give his last dollar to a stranger in need, who would promise you the moon and then genuinely try to figure out how to deliver it. He was also terrible with money," she continued, her voice growing more honest. "Not because he was selfish or careless, but because he couldn't bear to disappoint people. He would make commitments he couldn't keep, loans he couldn't repay, promises he couldn't fulfill, all because he genuinely believed that somehow things would work out." Edmund listened carefully, understanding that he was being trusted with sacred family history. "That's why the gambling debts accumulated," he said.
Not as a question, but as a statement of understanding.
"He thought he could win big enough to solve all our problems at once," Isabella confirmed. "He thought he could be the hero who saved his family through one spectacular success. When that didn't work, he thought he could negotiate with people who don't typically negotiate." Marcus had tears in his eyes, but for the first time, they were tears of understanding rather than anger. "I always wondered why you didn't seem more broken after he died. I thought it meant you didn't really love him." "I was broken," Isabella replied gently, "but I was also relieved, and the guilt from that relief has haunted me for years. I was relieved that the financial pressure was over, that I wouldn't have to worry anymore about creditors calling or threats from people we owed money to. I was relieved that you would be safe from the consequences of your father's well-intentioned but dangerous choices. And that relief made me feel like a terrible person," she continued. "What kind of wife feels relieved when her husband dies? What kind of woman immediately starts thinking about survival and security instead of just grieving?" Edmund reached across the table to take her hand. "The kind of woman who has a child to protect, and bills to pay, and a future to worry about." Isabella, feeling relief doesn't diminish the love you felt for Marcus's father. It just shows that you're practical and strong and focused on what needed to be done. "But it does explain why I was in the frame of mind to research eligible men and plan strategic encounters," Isabella said, looking directly at Marcus. "I wasn't looking for love, honey. I was looking for stability and security, and a future that wouldn't be dominated by fear." Marcus processed this, understanding finally why his mother's courtship with Edmund had seemed so swift and purposeful. "But you did fall in love with him." "Completely and helplessly, and in a way that surprised me every day," Isabella confirmed, looking at Edmund with obvious affection. "Your stepfather is nothing like your father was. Where Robert was impulsive, Edmund is thoughtful. Where Robert made promises he couldn't keep, Edmund carefully considers what he can deliver before committing. Where Robert was charming and optimistic, Edmund is steady and reliable." "I don't think I'm trying to replace your father, Marcus," Edmund said carefully. "I couldn't if I wanted to, and I wouldn't want to even if I could. But I hope I can offer you something different, something complementary to his legacy." "Like what?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. "Stability, reliability. Someone you can count on to be there when he says he will be, to do what he promises to do, to protect the people he cares about through consistency rather than grand gestures." Marcus considered this, thinking about his own personality, and what he might have inherited from both his biological father and gained from his stepfather's influence. "I think I need both," he said finally. "Father's optimism and passion, your steadiness and reliability." "You already have both," Isabella assured him. "Look at your conservation work. You have your father's passion for making the world better, but you approach it with Edmund's methodical planning and careful research. You're building something sustainable rather than just dreaming about ideal outcomes." This observation surprised Marcus, who had never considered how both men might have influenced his approach to his life's work. "I never thought about it that way." "That's what families do," Edmund said.
We influence each other, shape each other, contribute different strengths to help everyone become more complete. It doesn't require perfect relationships or identical values. It just requires commitment to each other's well-being and growth. As the evening continued, they talked about specific memories, shared stories that had been too painful to discuss before, and began to construct a new narrative of their family that acknowledged both its complexities and its strengths. Marcus learned details about his parents' financial struggles that helped him understand both his father's desperation and his mother's pragmatic response to widowhood. Isabella learned about Marcus's fears and resentments that had been building for years without expression. Edmund learnt about the depth of grief and love that had shaped both of them long before he entered their lives. "I have a confession to make," Marcus said as the night grew late. "Those documents I brought this morning, the ones I thought proved Mother's deception and manipulation. I'd been carrying them around for months, waiting for the right moment to use them." "What changed your mind?" Edmund asked. "Watching how you handled that journalist today. Realizing that families are supposed to protect each other, not expose each other. Understanding that the truth is more complicated than I thought, and that love can grow from imperfect beginnings into something genuine and valuable."
Isabella felt fresh tears forming, but these were tears of gratitude and relief rather than pain.
"Marcus, I want you to know that loving Edmund has never diminished my love for your father. If anything, it has helped me appreciate what your father gave me, including the gift of you, more fully. And I want you to know," Edmund added, "that I consider myself incredibly fortunate not just to have found love with your mother, but to have gained a son who cares so deeply about family, truth, and justice. Those are qualities that will serve you well throughout your life." As they prepared to end their conversation, Marcus had one final question. What happens now? How do we move forward from here? Edmund considered this carefully. "We build from what's real and valuable. We learn from what's been difficult. And we commit to being more honest with each other going forward. We stop trying to be a perfect royal family and focus on being a genuine family that happens to have royal responsibilities. We also make space for your father's memory in our family story," Isabella added. "Not as a source of guilt or comparison, but as an important part of our history and a continuing influence on who we all are. And we use what we've learned about facing difficult truths together to help other families who are struggling with similar challenges," Edmund concluded. The monarchy should be a source of hope and guidance for people facing their own complicated family situations. As they finally said goodnight and went to their respective rooms, each of them felt something that had been missing for years. The peace that comes from being genuinely known and loved by family members, flaws and all. The crisis that had threatened to destroy them had instead become the foundation for a stronger, more authentic relationship. In the months that followed, their family dynamics continued to evolve and strengthen. Marcus began spending more time at the palace, not as an obligation, but as a choice. His conservation work expanded to include royal patronage and funding, creating a meaningful partnership between his passion and Edmund's resources. Isabella found new confidence in her role as queen consort, no longer burdened by the secret of how her relationship with Edmund had begun. Most importantly, they had established a new standard for royal authenticity that resonated with the public. Their willingness to acknowledge that families face challenges while still maintaining their commitment to service and each other became a model that influenced other public figures and ordinary families alike. The journalist who had attempted to create scandal during the anniversary ceremony never found the explosive story she had been seeking. Instead, she found a family that had chosen honesty over perfection, growth over stagnation, and love over fear. In the end, that story proved far more compelling and inspiring than any scandal could have been. King Edmund's calm response to family crisis, supported by Queen Isabella's courage to face difficult truths, and Marcus's willingness to choose understanding over revenge, had indeed changed everything. But instead of destroying the monarchy, it had strengthened it, creating a new foundation built on authenticity, forgiveness, and the radical idea that even royal families could admit to being beautifully, imperfectly human.